out?
I think it's actually worth talking about. It's a bit misunderstood. Transformers was done in the context of a lot of like TPUs, transformers were all done to solve a specific product need to some extent, right? Like the team's thinking about how to make translation better. In the case of TPUs, how do you, hey, speech rec works, but you suddenly have to serve it to 2 billion people. We don't have enough chips for it. It's like, how do you solve inference for it? So
I hadn't known that. The transformers were specifically...
it was from our research teams, right? Yeah. But they were guided by solving product problems.
Yeah.
And transformers were immediately used. So Bert and Mom, people underestimate how much, because we measure search quality so religiously, some of the biggest jumps in search quality in that period where search went ahead of everyone else was because of Bert and Mom. We built transformers and used it immediately in search to improve language understanding web pages, understanding your queries, kept building better models. We had also started productizing it internally in the form of, there were teams building something called Lambda. So obviously we weren't the first to ship that, but I think it's less to do with like, it was just research and we weren't applying it in a product direction. That I think is just...
It's like you did this research, you then saw massive ROI from using it the way you intended, and then you didn't invent all of the products that were invented with it, but that's to be expected.
I would go a step further. We exactly even conceived the product, which is like ChatGPT, it was Lambda. If you would remember, there was an engineer inside who thought it was sentient, right? So think of it as an early version of ChatGPT he was speaking to internally. So we even had the product version of it in the multiverse somewhere else. Google probably shipped that 9 months later or something like that. Maybe in fact, in the Google I.O. in 22, we launched something called AI Test Kitchen, and that was Lambda, but we had constrained it because internally we didn't have an end-to-end version, which was RLHF, right? So the version I saw was a lot more toxic at a level we couldn't have possibly put it out at that time. And also I think as a company, which had this search quality bias, and so, we had a higher bar maybe, right, for what we thought was an acceptable product quality to go out. But it wasn't good. We were figuring out how to get it out. I would also argue that even when OpenAI shipped, they did their deal with Microsoft probably a couple of months before. So so you can look back and say, it wasn't entirely fully obvious. I think they were lucky to also see it on the coding side with GitHub. I think maybe that was a signal we were missing. Coding side, probably you were seeing more of a sequential jump than probably, just on the language side. So maybe the jumps between GPT-2 and 3 and later 4 were more pronounced, if you were using it for coding too. So that, you can point to things, but I think to answer your original question, I think it was less that research to product than a bunch of other factors.
I remember talking to some of the people who worked on ChatGPT, and I think they launched it the week of Thanksgiving. It was a little bit of a buried launch. It wasn't like this is a big prominent thing and this is going to be an important part of our future. I think it was a cool sort of test case. Yeah, it was really interesting.
But the way I internalize these moments is if you're in consumer internet, you're going to have surprises. We were at Google when Elad and I there was something called Google Video Search. YouTube came out, right? Just that we acquired YouTube. Or think about if you were in Facebook, Instagram came out. Nobody sits and says, you don't look at those moments with that drama because Facebook just bought Instagram. Right? But the way I've internalized is consumer internet. Three people are going to be sitting and prototyping and throwing out millions of things. I'm not trying to diminish anything, but I'm just saying you're always going to have these moments. I don't think people wake up in a garage and ship a better iPhone. That's not going to happen, right? But that's not how consumer internet is. So you just have to be conscious of that and internalize that.
As I think about the AI race in 2026, one thing that strikes me is Google has for so long had speed as the place it tries to differentiate. And so original Google search was really fast and, famously displayed the, search query time within the results, sort of showing off. And then, Gmail fast search compared to the competitors at the time, or Chrome compared to the competitors at the time. And now, I use all of the AI services for different things, but Gemini on TPUs is just so fast. And I'm curious how much this is part of the explicit product strategy and how you think of it, or it's much more nuanced than that.
I've always internalized speed. Let's call it as latency for this purpose, right? And as like one of the distinguishing features of a great product. And also almost always reflects the technical underpinnings of the product having been done well. There's a different speed which matters too, which is the speed of shipping and iteration and release cycles. So both are important, but you talk about latency. There are it's easy to say you want latency, but you're constantly adding capabilities. So the capability frontier is progressing. So there's some sense of how do you balance that. So that's where it gets more complicated. But to give an example, like search, I was speaking with the teams, right? Like they now have for sub teams, like latency budgets, like in the milliseconds. You get 50% credit if you ship something which shaves off 3 milliseconds, you earn 1.5 milliseconds for your latency budget, and 1.5 milliseconds gets passed on to the user, right? And depending on what we think you're doing, some people may get a latency budget of 30 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds. You can use it, but you have rigorous reviews against that. But that's how much we think it matters. So,
and for context, I guess humans pick it up in the low hundreds of milliseconds. Is that correct in terms of where it actually impacts?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think we've actually, last I checked the dashboards and the metrics, we've actually improved search latency by 30% in the last 5 years. But think about the functionality progression that's happened. This is why in Gemini, we deeply think about that Pareto frontier of making sure, the capability to speed and the flash models are at like 90% the capability of the pro models, but much faster, much more effective to serve, and the vertical integration helps, and so on.
How do you think about the future of search actually? Because a lot of people now are talking about chat as a new interface. Obviously, Gemini is incorporated, or search has incorporated Gemini or AI results in the context of Google. But a lot of people are now talking about agentic flows, and everybody's going to have a personal agent who, instead of typing in a query, it'll go and do something for you. Instead of asking about trips, it'll go and plan a trip for you. What do you view as the future of search? Is it a distribution mechanism? Is it a future product? Is it one of N ways people are going to interact with the world?
I feel like in search, with every shift, you're able to do more with it. And, we have to absorb those new capabilities and keep evolving the product frontier. If it's mobile, the product evolved pretty quickly. You're getting out of a New York subway, you're looking for web pages, you want to go somewhere, how do you find it? So you're constantly shifting people's expectations shift, and you're moving along. Yeah, if I fast forward, a lot of what are just information-seeking queries will be agentic in search. You'll be completing tasks. You'll have many threads running.
Will search exist in 10 years?
Well, you may...
Or it just evolves into something?
It keeps evolving. Right? Search would be an agent manager, right, in which you're doing a lot of things. I think in some ways I use anti-gravity today, and, you have a bunch of agents doing stuff. And I can see search doing versions of those things, and you're getting a bunch of stuff done.
But I think the root of your question is, if you think of search as a prompt that is not longer than one line, returning a bunch of different ranked results, as opposed to just telling you the right answer or something. I think your question is, does that product modality exist?
But today in AI mode in search, people do deep research queries, right? So that doesn't quite fit the definition of what you're saying, right? So, but kind of people adapted to that, right? So I think people will do long-running tasks.
Yes, sure.
Can be asynchronous.
Like, we all started, or the life started as unicellular organisms, and now we have this complex life. And so the question is almost like, does that former version or paradigm eventually go away? And really, what was search becomes an agent, and your future interface is an agent, and the search box in 10 years or N years is no longer.
I mean, the form factor of devices are going to change.
Sure,
I/O is going to radically change. And so, so it's tough to, I think you can paralyze yourself thinking 10 years ahead. But we are fortunate to be in a moment where you can think a year ahead, and the curve is so steep. It's exciting to just do that year ahead, right? Whereas in the past, you may need to sit and like envision 5 years out. I'm like, the models are going to be dramatically different in a year's time. And so, so I think riding the curve itself is exciting. And so I think it'll evolve, but it's an expansionary moment. I think what a lot of people underestimate in these moments is it feels so far from a zero-sum game to me, right? Like the value of what people are going to be able to do is also on some crazy curve, right? So once you view it that way, like people would ask all these questions, right? Like, I mean, YouTube has done well since TikTok and Instagram has, so I can give many examples. I think, the more you view it as a zero-sum game, it looks difficult. It can become a zero-sum game if you're innovating or the product is not evolving, or but as long as you are at the cutting edge of doing those things, and we are doing both search and Gemini, and right, and like and so they will overlap in certain ways. They will profoundly diverge in certain ways, right? So and so I think it's good to have both and embrace it.
When we talk about kind of search and where it's going and things like this, I'm reminded of the fact that basically a year ago, kind of spring, summer 25, sentiment was very negative on Google. The prevailing view was that, search is cooked and, going to have a really hard time. The core business model is under attack, blah, blah, blah. Google was trading for $150-ish a share. And now people have realized that's silly. Google has up and down the stack, whether it be applications or models or TPUs or whatever, it turns out, as well as Waymo and YouTube and all the cool bets. What do you think investors, as a proxy for kind of informed sentiment, misunderstood this time last year? Because clearly there was some big misunderstanding.
It's obviously kind of very inward focused in that moment. So, to me, it was very clear in that moment, hey, the Overton window shifted. We have, I felt like the company was built for that moment. The vertical thing, it's not an accident or something. It was a very intentful, we were in the 7th version of TPUs.
Yes.
I remember it might have been 2016 Google I/O where we announced the TPUs and spoke about we are building AI data centers. This was 2016. We were thinking about, the company was operating in an AI first way. So we had deeply internalized the shift. So to me, we were behind in terms of frontier LLM models, but we had all the capabilities internally and we had to execute to meet the moment. But we had, the exciting part was, when I look at it from full stack, we had the research teams, we had the infrastructure teams, we had all the platforms, and we had been investing intentfully in many businesses, right? And to me, I suddenly felt like, wow, we have this one common technology which can accelerate all those businesses. Search to YouTube to cloud to Waymo, all relies on progress. And this, so it was a very leveraged way to make progress. So I understood it. And to the earlier point of the discussion, I didn't view it as a zero-sum moment at all, right? And I felt like everything is going to scale up 10x, right? And there's going to be room for other people, right? And you go back, Amazon has done well since Google came into the picture and Facebook. So we underestimate the growth scenario of how all these things work, right? So, but we had to execute better as a company. So that's what I meant by, I was more focused on that.
Was there something that demonstrated to the outside world that, oh, they got this? Was it Gemini 3 that changed people's minds? Or like, I don't follow all the timelines, but
I think the real model probably where people saw it was maybe Gemini 2.5. And, and getting to the frontier on particularly around multimodality. We made a bunch of credit to the Google DeepMind teams, right? I think we paid a bit more of a fixed cost up front, but we designed the Gemini models to be very multimodal from day one. And so there were areas, I think the strength started showing. Nano Banana was an example of it, right? So you were able to see it all together. But look, it's an amazingly dynamic frontier. I think there are 2 to 3 labs who are pushing each other pretty vigorously. At any given month, we feel like, oh, great, we've done this well. Oh, shit, there's like a couple things we're behind, right? But I think the picture will again be dynamic in a few months. So I think the frontier is intense, as you would expect it to be. So that's how I think about it.
It's kind of interesting because when I talk to researchers, not at Google or at the other labs, one of the things that they commonly bring up is that they feel like the difference between the 2 or 3 other labs and the Google team is that Google is not as, they call it AGI pilled. In other words, there's less of a belief in AGI being right around the corner and the acceleration through it. And obviously the folks at Google are thinking deeply about that. A, do you think that's true? And B, do you think that it all impacts some notion of what the future actually looks like and therefore what people are building against?
Look, I think, we probably have scaled our CapEx from 30 billion to approximately 180 billion.
It's like real money now.
You don't do it if you don't think, about the curve a certain way. I view it as largely semantics, maybe because we are a larger company with a lot of products that touches so many people at so many levels. Maybe the language of how we talk about it might be different. I think the founders were AGI pilled. Probably,
That's kind of
my earliest conversation.
Yes.
So I think this notion that at Google we haven't understood what AGI is, or Demis and team, or Jeff Dean and team, at one point, I don't know, Demis, Jeff, Ilya, Dario were all there, right? So we can,
I like that retort. It's like, hello, have you been paying attention for the past 20 years?
So that doesn't make sense to me. I think some of it is, if you're a younger company, or you're more a pure research lab, you may be headquartered in San Francisco. There are a lot of small attributes which can probably make a difference. But I don't think at a foundational level, there is a difference in outlook on what the curve is, right? Or how we internalize the technology. Look, I think even within the company, there's a set of us living on the bleeding edge, firing agents, seeing what these things can do, see the agents pick up skills, do stuff, and also look back 3 months ago what they could do now. And we are living that exponential internally, right?
I think you're both right, where I agree, you can kind of point at the history of Google. I think what a lot's getting at is like a feeling. Where I saw a tweet go by that someone was saying, what you have to realize to explain what's currently going on in the Valley is that every tech executive has severe AI psychosis right now and is spending, a huge amount of time writing code and talking to AI and things like that. I thought that was a funny take and not without any truth to it. And I'm curious, what were your feeling the AGI moments along the way of the recent, or, to what extent do you have AI psychosis these days?
My first feeling the AGI moment was 2012 when Jeff Dean demoed the earliest version of Google Brain. This is when the neural networks recognized a cat, right? So that was 2012. I went with Larry to the DARPA challenge. It might have been 2014, I think. I need to be exact about when we went there, seeing the cars drive there. Demis demoing the earliest versions of the models having what we would call as imagination. So there have been many moments like that. So it was obvious the technology is progressing. In terms of living now and kind of having a visceral feel for it, I think the closest I would say is if you're coding and you give it a complex task and you never open the IDE and you're in some agent manager world and you see it kind of do it, you know, and how powerful it is. So, you know, if you can, you call that field AGI. So there are moments like that. Yeah.
Yes. I did a little hobby project recently, and after a while, I was like, oh, I wonder what language it's using. But that was like a detail that I needed to ask it about after everything was up and running.
It feels like magic. Yeah.
Yeah. So, moments like that for sure. Yeah. And but the slope of the curve is what surprises you.
Yeah.
Right. And you're improving it on so many paradigms. It feels clear that there's going to be progress ahead. Right. So
when you talk about the visceral feel, I feel like one thing that's important at tech companies, and every CEO thinks about this differently, is how you stay connected to the product experience and everyday users, because tech products are so abstract that it's easy to, you cannot just manage through reports from teams and slide decks and spreadsheets. And so, Tony Xu is talking about how he still works as a DoorDasher, to stay very connected to that experience. We do at our little weekly all hands, we have a recurring segment of Just Walk the Store, where we click around in the dashboard together and we're tripping over why is that modal there? And that's a bit confusing or whatever, just so we're collectively using the product. I'm curious how it works for you and how at Google you ensure that you're staying connected to the experience of using the products. Other than you use Gmail and everything every day.
No, yeah, dog fooding, literally internal versions. I do block time, to kind of use it intensely. So kind of focus time to do it. And so that helps. Even just 2 weeks ago, I was stretching in the gym and I had the phone with Gemini Live. And so I'm I'm going to talk to it for the entire 30 minutes on one topic. So you do those things, and it's some of it works, some of it is frustrating, but you kind of learn a lot, right? I force myself to use it in those power user mode ways, and stay in touch that way. X helps because sometimes you get the raw feedback.
Thank you for fixing the Google Calendar thing. That was so good.
Yeah. Oh, wow. The few more we have to fix, but
no, it's awesome.
Thanks for flagging it. So X helps because you kind of get the raw comments, and I try to follow it directly. But I'll tell you what has helped. Internally, I would go fire to our earlier part. I would query in anti-gravity, just our internal version of anti-gravity. Hey, we launched this thing. What did people think about this? Tell me the worst 5 things people are talking about, the best 5 things people are talking about. And I type that. So now that brings it back. So has my life gotten easier? Yes. So in the past, I would have to spend a lot more time trying to get a sense for it. Now an AI agent is helping me in that journey. So you can get, how much should I be spending firsthand to get that feel versus actually leveraging these tools? So even I'm going through a journey there, right? So I'm trying to adapt to this future.
I guess there's, you mentioned A, that it's not zero sum, B, there's all these productivity gains people are seeing. And if you look at a lot of prior technology cycles, it took a while for the internet or for mobile or for SaaS to show up in actual GDP numbers, right? In the context of AI, we're seeing it from a data center build-out perspective, right? That's driving part of GDP growth. How do you think ahead in terms of 3, 4, 5 years? Do you think the US economy is bigger because of AI? And if so, how much bigger?
Look, for these returns to make sense, somewhere it has to, how long was it before? I think it was maybe from Sequoia, someone wrote and saying people are investing this much.
Yeah, they're comparing the CapEx to the...
and this might have been 2.5 years ago, and it was a talk. And saying it doesn't make sense because you would need to return at that level. You probably 10x the investment. Since that moment, I need to go look at the numbers again, right? So at some point, it has to reconcile. To be very clear, we are we are supply constrained. We are seeing the demand across all the surface areas we
I actually don't have any doubt that this is a massive market and outcome. So my question, and I think there's a lot of things that people misunderestimate. So for example, people often talk about software engineering budgets and then what proportion of that is token versus salary. And to some extent, I think that market has been so demand constrained for great software engineers that suddenly adding supply can 10x that market, right? In other words, I think the market for software engineering and coding is dramatically bigger than anybody thinks, and it's the wrong metric to say, token budget versus engineers. So I actually think it should grow a lot of things.
Yeah.
I was just sort of curious of your view of like how much growth do we think is likely actually to come of this? I actually wasn't doubting at all sort of CapEx versus outcomes or,
I see.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, going back at the internet and looking at GDP growth, it doesn't quite capture what we all feel with the internet, right? And so maybe we would have had negative GDP growth without the internet.
Consumer surplus.
So it's tough to look ahead. I do think there are natural dampening mechanisms in society at various levels. And the obvious ones being, the compute build out is a different curve than the rate at which we can improve the models, right? So you're already dealing with a more constrained curve there. Then how do you diffuse it into society, right? We are doing this with Waymo, right? And you can make Waymo safer than human drivers, but you have to be careful at the pace at which we are rolling out, etc. So sometimes, how do you diffuse it through society responsibly? There are constraints in all these layers, right? So, but I think the U.S. economy is so much larger than it was 10 years ago. So to grow that, even at a 0.5 percentage point higher, then that's a massive contribution. So I expect it to play out that way.
Listening to Sundar is a powerful reminder of what it means to operate at true internet scale. When it comes to commerce, though, most businesses are forced to make critical decisions in a vacuum. They view the internet economy through only their own lens, using only the data that exists within their four walls. This is where Stripe comes in. Because we process $1.9 trillion a year in global payments, we have a panoramic view. When you build on Stripe, you're plugging in to that network intelligence, from verifying a user's identity, to stopping fraud before it starts, to streamlining how businesses connect and knowing what payment methods work best locally. We've built a system that puts 1.6% of global GDP to work to protect and grow your revenue. So, if you want to use the power of Stripe's network intelligence, come see what you can build here. You referenced the supply constraints, and I think that's a really interesting defining aspect of 2026, basically, where you said 150 billion in CapEx, 180?
We have said it'll be between 175 and 185.
Okay, so 180-ish billion of CapEx. And what's interesting to me is that Google could not spend $400 billion in CapEx if it wanted to, because the memory isn't there and the power isn't there and all these components. So can you just tick through?
We can find a number of electricians we would need.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'd love to hear just your overview of the various bottlenecks.
Look, at some level, you have to work back to actual wafer capacity or something like that, right? So there are deeper ground truths, right? I think so. Wafer starts. It's kind of a fundamental constraint. I think power and energy are more solvable. Permitting and actually working through a regulatory environment might be a constraint, right? So the pace at which you can do things.
Even though there's lots of land in pro-growth, Texas or Nevada or Montana, just maybe not enough?
I think we're making tremendous progress. I think for the US, I think it's a particularly important thing. You're in awe of how the pace in China, how fast they can build things. So I really think we need to learn to build things much faster. You almost have to shift your mentality to think about what would it take to do things 10x faster, right? In the physical world, construct 10x faster. But I would worry about that as a constraint, right? I think